Men in our culture, specifically white men, are simultaneously considered to be both the only people who are human and not human at all. While it's not often discussed in these terms, odds are good that most of us, of all identities, can already feel the truth in that statement. But, as my math teachers insisted, I'll show some of my work before I move on to where I think that points and what it means. Trying to describe this is like trying to walk along the edge of a razor blade, both in that it's a very tricky balancing act, and that the weight of our reality is likely to cut deep on the sharp edge of this truth. If the ways in which men are treated poorly and unfairly in our current system feel heavy to you, or if you think that men are given too much power and centered too much in our current system, I agree with you. I think the truth of this is nuanced, and I'll do my best to honor all parts of it, but it's hard. I don't think I have this solved, but I do think it's important to discuss the nuance, so I'll do my best and I ask for some grace along the way. The primary way in which we treat men as the only full human beings is in our cultural behavior, which gives white men the most access to the full spectrum of basic human rights, ranging from legal rights to the right to change. I know there's nuance in that, and there's ways in which we emphatically don't give men the right to change at all. That's part of the point of this video, and I'll get there, but please bear with me. For most of the history of the US and many other countries, white men were the only people who were legally considered people at all. That lineage of thought did not simply disappear when women and people of color gained the right to vote. White masculinity continues to define our concept of humanity. There are normal car seat covers and women's car seat covers. Normal TV shows and music and entertainment geared explicitly towards black people or women or any of the other different types of people. Through this exclusive normalization of white masculinity, the dominant society still treats white men as the most deserving of grace, forgiveness, tangible support, and human rights. For example, regardless of how you feel about his politics, we currently have a serious political candidate who has 5 children by 3 different women, each of whom he publicly cheated on, in addition to having bankrupt 6 businesses and having a laundry list of legitimate assault charges. Do you think that if he was anything other than a white man, in the court of public opinion of the US, he would be considered eligible to be president of the United States? The idea is laughable, but it's excused for him, and often even celebrated by his supporters. Even apart from his ongoing structural crimes against humanity, those cheering for Biden conveniently forget about his horrifying crimes against women in his life, which he too has never taken a single shred of accountability for. The same ethic applies all the way down through the strata of society. These are obviously broad brushstrokes with many meaningful exceptions, but culturally, single mothers are generally regarded as low-value failures, while single fathers are seen as eligible providers. Without even realizing we're doing it, we grant men, especially white men, forgiveness, grace, and room for growth. Look at Brett Kavanaugh, with zero accountability of any kind, in fact, while dramatically and obviously lying in a wildly self-centered and self-excusing way, he was still made one of the most powerful people in the entire world by a nominally democratic government. From one very particular lens, that's a truly astonishing level of cultural acceptance of someone's harmful past and wounds, and it's only available to white men today. Culturally, we just categorically excuse men in a way that we excuse no one else, making that excusal a form of privilege. All that's quantifiable, so it's useful to see, but there's another much more subjective and difficult to describe way in which we make men the only humans. It has to do with who is seen as the main character in a story. There's obviously a very real way in which everyone thinks of themselves as the main character in their story, and there's ways in which that's healthy. But there's a more insidious way in which men are often treated as the main character in other people's stories. I know many, many hetero relationships where both people just sort of center the guy. The woman is a supporting character to his main character. Sometimes that's a learned safety mechanism for the women from that relationship, prior ones, or the culture at large, and sometimes it's just the cultural norm. White men constitute maybe 30% of the US population and hold 65% of elected offices. We are all so used to centering men that it barely registers at all. But I'm still not quite catching the heart of this. All these statistics and examples don't capture the very real way in which our culture treats men as the only people who are fully human. White women's tears are powerful, not because we see women as fully human. They're powerful because in the plot of the conventional Hollywood movie, when the white woman cries, that's when the white man, who is usually the main character, has to stop doing whatever he's doing and pay attention to the woman who's a side character. They are often a plot device to reveal men's humanity. This is one reason they're so dangerous. White women's tears demand action from the only full humans, the white men. Obviously, there are more to all of the dynamics of white women's tears, which other creators can speak to far better than I can, but can you see how the marginalization of women, which is a form of dehumanization, feeds into the idea that men are the only full humans? Like, I really love the book To Kill a Mockingbird. The concepts of integrity in that book shaped my sense of the world. I love Atticus Finch. And there's a very real way in which all of the people of color in that book exist only as plot devices to reveal the deep humanity of Atticus Finch. The lens that we're given to see the humanity of any of the people of color in that book is the deep, compelling humanity of the white man. Even the side plots. Boo Radley is another white man whose terrifying exterior and reputation is peeled back to reveal his deep, compelling humanity. That's not a critique of the book. I think that book was and is a force of good in the world. It's a critique of the culture. Before I move on to the ways in which our culture treats men as inhuman, let me just clarify. None of this is a favor to men. Teaching white men that we're the only real people in the world is profoundly isolating. Many, if not most, white men today think of themselves, consciously or not, as smarter than women and people of color. The number of men who genuinely think they could beat, or at least compete with, Olympic-level female athletes is truly astonishing. I catch this in myself today. Watching professional athletes who are women, I sometimes have flashes of thought that I could match her, or I'm bigger and stronger. It's categorically delusional. I do zero cardio, I'm pushing 40, I smoke, I have bad knees. The idea that I could compete with the women I'm watching is legitimately delusional. That's my point. It's a delusion that men are the peak of humanity or the only humans, and it's lonely. I see the loneliness in it in the dialogues of red pill guys and in the incel community, where these guys genuinely believe that women can't keep up with male mental prowess or that women are inherently emotional or whatever else. It's heartbreaking. I think this delusional loneliness is directly connected to the pandemic of mental health crises that men face in the world today. This dovetails neatly into the ways in which our culture treats men as not human at all. The vast majority of the world are not adult men, let alone adult white men. So by creating a class which is the strong minority, and then defining that minority as the definition or pinnacle of the larger category which that class is a part of, men sever ourselves from humanity. Imagine oak trees thinking that they were the only full trees, or the only real trees, or the best trees. Imagine them saying, well, real trees make acorns, so if you don't make acorns, you're not a real tree. By defining treeness as acorn production, these oaks would diminish the treeness of oaks to themselves. They shift the focus in a way that minimizes the reality in which they are trees. They'd be cutting themselves off from the essence of what it means to be a tree, all the strength its diverse expressions manifest as. For men, this is done primarily by identifying with rationality and violence. Those of you who watched my Stonehenge video on YouTube will remember how when a group of people is wounded by a weapon for long enough, if they internalize those wounds, they begin to identify with the weapon itself. The weapon becomes a part of their cultural identity. Masculinity has been severed from our emotionality for a long time, to the point where it's hard for many men to identify our emotions at all, especially other than anger, let alone navigate the complex emotional landscape with skill or grace. So we celebrate and identify with rationality, because it makes the wound of our separation from our emotions into a strength, rather than facing the wounded weakness that it actually is. As products of a colonial culture, we inherit a deep belief that domination violence solves problems, and that domination violence advances our interests, and that shapes men's instincts our whole lives. Even as men work to become safe people, to gain emotional fluency, to be healthy partners and parents, we retain the separation from our emotions and learn to default to domination violence. For many men, early efforts to heal are simply turning that learned instinct towards domination on ourselves. We try to dominate ourselves into health. Or, when we start to see how our culture, and we as products of our culture, dehumanize women, we subtly or overtly don't change the mechanism of dehumanization because we have no idea how or what that would look or feel like. We just shift gears, throw her into reverse, and back over ourselves. Many men never get out of this, spend the rest of their lives hating and harming themselves. And it's hard to sustain, though, so a lot of men from that foundation shift into victimhood. That's blurry territory, because it's true that men are harmed by this system, but the narrative of victimhood, especially as a central identity, is often self-excusing, and almost always a precursor to causing harm. But noteworthy is that all three of those narratives, the narrative that men are naturally dominant, the narrative that critically aware men often pick up of hating ourselves, and the narrative that men are victims, are all expressions of the same central form of dehumanization that our culture practices for men, which is mechanization. We reduce the beautifully complex whole of a human being down to some highly reductionist, largely culturally invented trends and emergent behavior. We see violence in men, so we believe that men must be naturally violent. We see men as emotionally stunted, so we believe men are naturally distant from our emotions. Both are classic correlation-causation confusion, and despite many men thinking of themselves as deeply rational, they never notice the fallacy. They just stay in a cold, mechanized lie the rest of their lives. And this tendency to treat men as mechanical is not just from men. It's a cultural trend. Our culture treats men as machines. You know what the leading cause of deletion is for men under 45? It's accidents. That's no accident. Men run our bodies ruthlessly. The number of roofs I've fallen off of and just insane crap I've done to my body is wild, and that's normal. Job site culture and men's culture in general is harsh on men's bodies, as well as our hearts and souls. We treat ourselves like machines, and then when the machines of ourself don't perform well, our instinct is not compassion or gentleness. It's anger, frustration. Living a redneck life, I've seen a lot of injuries to people of all genders. When women hurt themselves, they usually express pain, concern, and grief. She was fine, but I've seen a 20-foot hemlock timber pin my wife against a standing tree. She expressed hurt and concern for her beautiful body. When men hurt ourselves, we express anger. The margin of error on this that I've seen is nearly zero. It's simply how men respond to injuries. I respond to cutting my arm open the exact same way I do to my tractor blowing a hydraulic line or my sawmill losing a bearing. Damn it, now I have to deal with this. It's a lifelong, instantaneous redirection of pain into anger, because anger is the masculine emotion. Notably, it's not a constructive emotion response to my tractor or my sawmill either. My anger helps nothing. I have known that for years, and my personal work has transferred to my tools. The responses I just described are more historical. These days, I'm more likely to sigh. And I intentionally tend my body when I wound myself, but that's taken time. Most of my life was exactly as I described. This mechanization of masculinity, which is dehumanizing, extends to cultural communication, from workplace to romance, and most men think they prefer it. What men think of as clear communication is communication which minimizes emotionality, and if emotionality must be present, it is as domesticated as possible. We want emotional communication without the emotions. We don't recognize that "I love you" is not the same as "I love you." They're not the same statement. They don't have the same impact. That's not to say that a very stoic guy flatly saying "I love you" is meaningless. It can be very powerful. It's just not the same or as complete as a more emotionally present, expressive statement. I give this example in the positive because most men never think of this. We only think of the opposite, how we wish our partners could explain how they feel hurt by us with zero emotion in it, without considering the flip side. In the exact same way that those two statements are not the same, for our partners or coworkers or whoever to communicate devoid of any emotions is reinforcing of the idea that men are mechanical. Imagine if we got what we wanted, if communication was the way that emotionally dissociated men often think we want it to be. When I tried to get your attention earlier and you ignored me to run to your video game, I felt hurt. Information received. I will modify behavior accordingly. It's a massive lie by omission. It bypasses all the meaningful reality of emotional exchange. It strips away any of the real deep emotional asks of men. The whole narrative is self-excusing, but not how we think. We think that it's minimizing drama or work or something and making communication more clear, but it's really just excusing us from the reality and making communication less holistically honest. It excuses us from relationship and presence and love. It excuses us from support, and it doesn't work. So this tendency to mechanize men leads to more explosive communication from men and everyone communicating with us when those realities that we'd rather ignore invariably bubble up. Then we criticize people for being emotional. We don't praise men the way many of us know humans should be praised. And when we do, our praise is often backhanded dehumanization. We praise men for being inhuman, not for being human. John Henry is self-deleted while outperforming a machine. That's a real man's man right there, right? We don't compliment men for their humanity. And we often relentlessly critique men for their humanity. Much of men's culture today is just men mocking and criticizing one another's humanity. All of this normalized dehumanization of men is now in amplifying feedback loops in our society, which are incredibly hard to escape from. Men are treated as emotionless. We act as emotionless, and then our distance from our emotion feeds into us and more men being treated as emotionless. The entire body of rhetoric, from Jordan Peterson to J.D. Vance, talking about how traditional masculinity is suppressed, is the internalization, glorification, and perpetration of this exact cycle of wounds. Their concept of traditional masculinity is in reality the wounds of emotional isolation and male supremacy, and it's caustically dehumanizing to men. That sentence stands on its own, apart from the fact that embedded in it is the rampant dehumanization of women. This is where the very real cultural biases that MRAs love to cite come from, including court biases in who gets custody of children, which are very real. But that's not the whole story, and since I'm mentioning this, I need to clarify. Statistically, mothers are far less likely to physically harm children than fathers are. That's a commonly confused statistic because children are far more likely to be harmed by their mothers than their fathers. And that can seem counterintuitive to people who haven't studied statistics, but it's a numbers thing because mothers do the vast majority of the parenting in this country. So if a child is harmed by one of their parents, it's likely to be their mother. But given the same window of time alone with a child, a father is far more likely to harm that child. So fathers are way more dangerous. But when you compare how many children are impacted, mothers cause way more harm. But if fathers spent the same amount of time parenting that mothers do and the current trends held, fathers would cause way, way more harm than mothers do. This is part of why courts are more likely to award guardianship to mothers, and it's a part that MRAs tend to either misinterpret or skip over entirely. But there's another point in here which I think can get buried under all of that, and it's incredibly, perhaps globally, imperative that we understand it. There was a trend going around a few months ago of women, often mothers, asking fathers of daughters if they knew any men who they would trust alone with their daughter at 18 in a cabin in the woods for a week. And the responses of these fathers were dramatic and telling. You can watch the spectrum of responses. Some fathers, without missing a single beat, saying, "Nope, not a single one, never." To fathers thinking and then looking horrified as they realize that there's not a single man they would trust with their daughter at peak objectification age in the male gaze. Honestly, watching these clips was kind of horrifying for me, but for a totally different reason. I'm not a father yet, so I can't speak to that. But I do have nieces and sisters on my spouse's side between 16 and 22, young women who I've loved and watched grow as family for decades, who slept on my chest the day they were born, who I would lay my life down for in a heartbeat, whose safety is the absolute highest priority in my world. The thought of these young women being harmed brings up my most violent instincts. I would die before putting them in danger. So it's not fatherhood, and I know that, but it is fierce familial love and protection with full-blown redneck uncle vibes. And without even trying, I can think of at least 24 men who I would instantly feel 100% safe putting those young women alone in a cabin with for any period of time. It doesn't matter how you tweak the question. Oh, what if there's only one bed? What if there's alcohol? The nature of the men who I'm talking about is such that I know that they would not only be completely safe, I know that those young women would leave that experience healthier than they went into it. They would genuinely be better off, healthier, safer, and better equipped to face the world. The men I'm thinking of are simply healthy, wise, kind human beings. Their gender is part of their humanity, but it's not the determining factor, and as people, they're not bound by the wounds of their gender. Young people of any gender would be deeply lucky to have a month in a cabin with any of those men, and their lives and hearts would be better for having had that time. My community is healthier than the cultural norm, and I know that. So maybe, regardless of your gender, you honestly don't know any men who would be safe in those circumstances. That's possible. But it's also possible that the horrifying wounds of masculinity, and our emergent awareness of those wounds, the harmful nature of many men in your life, have given you wounds that make it very difficult for you to see men who are safe. As wounded people, we often project and globalize our wounds, and in doing so, we create worlds which make healing less accessible. When I'm depressed, I often think the whole world is secretly depressed and a wreck. That feeling is valid, and I can find ample evidence to support it, which creates a feedback loop, making the world feel like a place I don't even want to be in at all. It's a lie by exaggeration and globalization that my wounds feed me. The evidence I use to support that lie is valid. Things are hard, but not everyone is depressed, and the world is not as dark as my mental health challenges sometimes try and paint it. Similarly, the fact that all men inherit, benefit from, and perpetrate patriarchy does not mean that all men are dangerous. Many, many men have done serious work in healing the wounds we inherited. Men inherit different levels of woundedness, of toxicity, so some men have done a lot of healing and are still below average, and some have done less healing but are much healthier. Separate from health, though, some of the wisest and safest men I know have had some of the roughest starts and have done heroic levels of healing work to get there. And those guys are often quiet and easy to overlook. My point here is that men are not a monolith in any direction, and it's dangerously easy to forget that given the wounds that we all, but especially women, suffer at the hands of men. In a world as wounded as ours is by patriarchy, it's a radical thing to recognize that there are not just neutral, but actively healthy men. When Rising Appalachia, one of my favorite bands, sings "Medicine Woman, Medicine Man, walking with grace, I know your face and I trust your hands," it touches my heart, because for women today to express that kind of trust in and celebration of men is an act of radical healing. Across all genders, a lot of people aren't there yet and can't express that, and that's valid. They can't trust any men's hands, and they have reasons for that. Formal logic differentiates between an argument being valid and an argument being sound, though. A valid argument is one where the sequence is rational. A sound argument is one where the sequence is rational and the foundations are true. So while people's categorical mistrust of men is valid, it is emphatically not sound. People project the harm that they've suffered onto all of masculinity all the time. You can see it in the comments of my videos. I made a video recently about how minor requests can be bids for emotional connection in partnership. And in the comments, a bunch of people were like, "You should be helping your wife without being asked." It's a statement that comes from the all-too common trend of men relying on women's invisible labor and expecting women to be domestic servants to men. Completely valid. Also, not a sound criticism of every cohabitative relationship between a man and a woman. My wife would be the first to tell you that I do like 3/4 of our domestic labor, from laundry to dishes, and we have regular check-ins and clear mechanisms and expectations and communication around that. For me to be sitting while they do domestic labor is the rare exception to the norm. So the argument in those comments is valid, but not sound. And applying valid emotional experiences to an entire demographic of people is dehumanizing. This is the small nugget of truth in the common men's refrain of, "But not all men." The vast majority of that refrain is often denial and self-excusal, but there is a very real little nugget in there which we must learn to see and speak to if we want to address reality holistically, let alone speak effectively to wounded defensive men. The statement, "All men inherit, benefit from, and perpetrate patterns of patriarchy," and the statement, "Projecting our emotional experiences of wounded men onto all men categorically is dehumanizing and problematic," are both true. Projecting our experiences of harm onto all men categorically has serious effects. It prevents us, both individually and culturally, from being able to recognize or celebrate men's growth and healing, and that has the effect of erasing and disappearing and invalidating mentors in men's healing who are desperately needed. Many men think that allyship means adopting this categorical judgment of men, and that makes it very hard to see men who we could learn from. It also creates a culture where there are no avenues for men's healing. If men are categorically harmful, where's the hope? What's the point of attempting to heal? Can you see how this narrative is existentially dehumanizing to men and how harmful and dangerous that is? Believing that there are no men who could be safe alone in a cabin in the woods with a young woman for a month is a lie, fed to us by our very real and valid wounds. It's a lie that's dangerously easy to validate. You can find mountains of evidence to support it without even trying, but that doesn't make it sound. It doesn't make it true. So beyond what our wounds tell us, beyond what we're taught allyship is supposed to sound like, I'm asking you to genuinely lean into the question and consider, are there any men in your life who you actually would trust with a young woman in a cabin alone in the woods for a month? I bet you do. I bet there are. At least one. Even if you don't like him, even if he's not perfect, because I promise he's not. That's not the question here. Those men, and their counterparts in every other question of healing the wounds of masculinity today, they're holding lights. Odds are good they're holding them quietly. Most men who speak loudly about masculinity today are pretty wounded. But those lights are very important for your own healing and for the healing of the world. And if, beyond your wounds and concepts of what allyship should look like, you genuinely don't know a single man who would be safe with a young woman, then I invite you to consider the communities that you're in. Because men who meet that really very low bar are actually not that hard to find. If you're a man, I invite you to consider, should your community trust you in that situation? If we were in community, you and I, would you be on my list of men who I would trust with my 20-year-old niece? For most of my life, even after learning healthier consent practices, I wasn't really a safe person for women. Are you today? Will you be if you stay on the path you're on? Food for thought, my friend. The work of healing these wounds is, by definition, intersectional. If we focus entirely on humanizing women while dehumanizing ourselves, we are still engaging in that core wound of dehumanization. If we focus entirely on the humanity of men while ignoring the very real impacts that patriarchy has on women, we're playing right back into the same cycles that lead to men's dehumanization to begin with. It is effectively impossible to humanize anyone without humanizing everyone, and that means holding space for everybody's wounds. It means holding everybody to the standards of humanity. It means celebrating health and wellness for all types of people. This is tricky to talk about because so often the wounds of masculinity lead men to weaponize emergent nuance. So often when men talk about the need to humanize men and hold space for men's wounds, the very woundedness that we're asking to have held leads us to, overtly or tacitly, put that work onto women. We use our awareness of our own woundedness like a shield to point the finger at women and to avoid looking at our own wounds. One of my teachers, Utah Phillips, said, "White men are born armed to the teeth, and it's our job to put down as many of our weapons as we can before we die." Largely because of that, the work of humanizing men must start with men. We must humanize ourselves, both internally and to one another. This is one of the great values of men's groups. There is space for us to practice humanizing one another with love and support and accountability and forgiveness. That's healthy men's work today, and it allows us to start showing up in healthier ways with the women in our lives. By sharing our wounds and needs with one another, we can start breaking the pattern of putting our emotional needs onto the women in our lives. But this work can't be done in gendered seclusion, and it's dangerous to try. It's dangerously easy for men's groups to fall into the trap of being self-excusing silos, as most men's spaces today are. So it's another razor's edge for us to walk, to neither fall into self-excusal nor self-damnation. Tricky balances. And it points to a way in which this work really needs collective support. One place I see this most clearly is in how each gender has perforce gained practice in different skills. Because of the way that patriarchy so explicitly wounds women, women have had to gain experience in being harmed. So the feminist movement and most women in the world have experience in surviving harm. They've learned how to walk with that, how to navigate that, how to humanize themselves through that, because they've had to. Women are not a monolith, and obviously some women navigate those waters with more skill and grace than others, but the point stands that women and women's culture has serious experience in reckoning with having been harmed. The healthier parts of men's culture have, for many decades, been reckoning with having caused harm. It's heavy work. It's broken many men, but we're getting there, slowly. We're working on how to walk with the knowledge that we've hurt people. Again, men are also not a monolith, so some are certainly more skilled and graceful in that than others, but we're working on it. And as a group, men's work is gaining valuable experience and skill in this. But here's the thing. We're all harmed by the systems we live under. The fact that the harm this system causes to women is so much more explicit and harder to ignore doesn't mean that men aren't being harmed. We very much are. And that statement stands on its own, and it should be said more often, albeit with care. The system harms men. And the fact that the system explicitly harms women does not mean that women don't cause harm. They do. Remember the lesson of recovery from addiction. Hurt people hurt people. So of course wounded women cause harm. How could they not? Beyond the wild inefficiency of it, the escalating trajectories of the wounds of the world, by which I mean the compounding and exponential nature of the wounds of the current system, don't leave us enough time for men to learn through fumbling trial and error how to have been harmed with skill and grace. Right now, as a group, men are fumbling with it. We weaponize the harms we've suffered and slow everything down and muck everything up. Analogously, we don't have time for women to learn how to have caused harm from the ground up. I see this so clearly these days in the very valid and sound critiques of white women. When people of color try to show white women how they're causing harm, white women tend to respond exactly the same way that men have responded to such information for a very long time. Denial, defensiveness, accusation, minimization, attacks, classic Darvo stuff. It feels painfully familiar to me to watch. So, we need to learn from one another. Women have wisdom to share with men and the men's movement about how to move in the world having been harmed. And as men, we desperately need that wisdom, that perspective, and we need it now. It is the grace and skill that the healthiest parts of the women's movement, feminism, hold, which can most deeply validate the millions of young men who are currently both running and being pushed towards the far right. And the healthiest parts of the community of men who are working on these things have wisdom that women need to hear in order to face the harms that they cause with grace and integrity. So it's not only that humanization of anyone requires humanization of everyone, it's that we can't, or simply don't have time, to relearn humanity in any other way. I find modern therapeutic techniques such as CBT, EMDR, and IFS far more useful in creating internal change than traditional psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. But despite those older modalities being less effective in my experience, some of the old psychologists are pure gold mines of insight about the psyche, especially the humanists. Carl Rogers wrote an entire book on the exact work I'm talking about, albeit through a slightly different lens, like 80 years ago, and it's amazing. It's called On Becoming a Person. One part of that book I find fascinating is his documentation of the changes that occur in people as they engage in meaningful healing work over time. Chapter 6, which is titled What It Means to Become a Person, he outlines how the primary differences he saw in people working to heal over his many decades of practice were these. They become more open to experience, meaning that they had less defensiveness and clearer eyes. They began to trust their own organism, meaning that they were more in touch with their emotions and their own bodies. They shifted to an internal locus of evaluation, meaning that their own discernment, ethics, and emotions became the basis of their judgments rather than any external value or belief system. And they shifted from a concept of self being rigid to a concept of self as process. They became, in his words, more willing to be a process. From these, we can reverse engineer the person wounded by this system as having the following 4 traits: closed to new experiences, out of touch, mistrustful of their own organism, evaluating based on external criteria, and thinking of themselves as rigid or fixed. I don't know about you, but that describes a lot of people I know, and describes me when I was a lot less healthy and even when I regress today. So all the valid critiques of old school psych and even Rogers aside, I think he was onto something. There are other whole models of community and self from much healthier communities, indigenous communities. Many of them outline other metrics of gauging health and illness, which are powerful. I'm not into white guys sharing native perspectives, so I'll just point you to Gilbert Walking Bull and to Jake and Judy Swamp as some brilliant native folks who shared some of those perspectives publicly. If you're curious, I recommend them. The Symptoms of Grief and the Condolences are powerful teachings. But within my own cultural lineage, I think Carl Rogers was on the right track, and I think those 4 metrics are useful measures of how far along we are in our healing work. How close are you to fully open to new experiences, trusting your own organism, evaluating based on internal locus, and willing to be a process? Hold on, though. We can't actually see ourselves that clearly. How close would the people who know you best say you are to those metrics if they were being completely honest and weren't talking to you? That gap is a decent measure of how far we have to go. It's noteworthy that outcomes are almost never the best goal. The shortest distance between 2 points is only a straight line in mathematics. Everywhere else, it's the opposite. By this, I mean, if you want something, trying to get that thing is often counterproductive, at least incredibly inefficient. This is especially true in psychology. Like, trying to be happy is a surefire way to be dissatisfied and probably depressed. If you want to be happy, practice gratitude. Gratitude is what leads to happiness, not trying to be happy. In a similar way, if, as a man, our goal is to respect women, there's a very real way in which we're better off learning to love ourselves first. Holistic self-love and self-humanization lead to respect for others, including women, in a far more efficient path than trying to respect women as an other category. I don't mean ego or self-aggrandizement or self-centeredness. I mean true self-love. This is also a razor's edge. Many men today think they love themselves because they can see that this society hurts them. But so long as they're pointing fingers at someone else in the society, especially someone else who's being harmed, that's not really self-love. It's just rebranded defensiveness, rigidity, and fragility. Once you learn to love yourself genuinely, You stop excusing and tolerating harms done to you by our society. And that will naturally lead you to simultaneously stop excusing and tolerating harms done to anyone else, including harms that you've caused. That's what makes it hard. That's why so many guys stop before it gets to that point. We don't want to face the harms that we benefit from and the harms that we've caused. I share all that just to underscore the need for women's wisdom and men's wisdom to cross-pollinate. Not in some nebulous spiritual way. We need to start genuinely, openly talking about how to walk in the world having been harmed and having caused harm. And we need to listen to one another with the clearest eyes and ears that we can, not defensiveness. May we all learn to see the humanity of ourselves and each other. Okay, freedom.